Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. Imagine if open world RPGs had great action combat. Well, that's not so hard to imagine today, but before Kingdoms of Amalur and some other open world RPGs like Dragon's Dogma came out, it was still hard to find an open world RPG that's worth playing only for the action gameplay.
So, are you foolish or just stupid?
The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim took the gaming world by storm, even though it didn't exactly have an amazing action gameplay. At the end of the day, the combat is only one part of these massive open world RPGs, and you have to make sure to invest an equal amount of development time in all other major areas. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning came out shortly after Skyrim in 2012 for PC, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. It was one of the first, if not the first AAA Western RPG that focused on delivering a great action gameplay system. Even the marketing surrounding this title focused on explaining the philosophy behind the combat system. A couple of developers from Big Huge Games, the studio behind Kingdoms of Amalur, talked about the lack of cool combat mechanics in RPGs and how they want to change that with this new and exciting title.
So with Reckoning, what I wanted to do was really bring the hardcore action moment-to-moment button presses and choices that players have with an action game or a fighting game into the RPG stance. So you're not looking so much at DPS and like math over time, you're looking at which attacks I'm using over time and how to defend it properly and where I am in relation to each enemy.
That's the thing we play RPGs. You do the RPG element, but you're like, oh man, I gotta go fight this in this dungeon. This is gonna be boring.
You got the like slow, and that's my combat.
You're not looking forward to fighting, but you're looking forward to the story because it's so interesting.
We really wanted to bring the RPG gamer a little bit more to the action side.
So, did they succeed? Well, yes and no, depending on your perspective. The action gameplay was, without a doubt, one of the biggest selling points of Kingdoms of Amalur, but it was definitely not perfect, and I'm going to talk about it in greater depth very soon. On the other hand, the game sold 1.3 million copies in about 5 months, which was really impressive for a brand new IP. However, that wasn't nearly enough to cover the cost of the development. Big Huge Games needed to sell at least 2 million copies in sales to turn a profit, which is kinda insane for a brand new IP. Something like this is certainly not impossible today, where even some unknown indie titles with zero marketing managed to reach those numbers. Then again, we also had many AAA games which failed miserably, or those that severely underperformed.
I've been noticing the symptoms everywhere.
The gaming scene was a lot different back in 2012, and expecting such astronomical numbers from a brand new IP killed this RPG before it even came out. There's a lot more to this topic and how this game almost bankrupted an entire state, but that won't be the focus of this video. Kingdoms of Amalur got a re-release version in 2020 after this IP got acquired by THQ Nordic. They also ported the game to PlayStation 4, 5, Xbox One, Series X and S, as well as the Switch. This version of the game is called Re-Reckoning, and it's the only version of the game that you can buy today, physical and digital.
Oh, I thought you might have been keen on the idea.
In 2021, Re-Reckoning got a brand new expansion called Fatesworn. This is nothing new when it comes to THQ Nordic. They like to release a brand new expansion for some old games for which they acquired the IP. After all, it would not make sense to buy these IPs and keep them on the shelf. They did something similar for Titan Quest, another very old RPG. And eventually we got to see a full-blown sequel for this game get announced, which gives me hope for Kingdoms of Amalur sequel, even though THQ Nordic didn't show anything about Kingdoms of Amalur in one of their recent showcases. However, they still have a lot of unannounced projects, and hopefully the sequel for Amalur is one of them. One can hope, right?
Never make assumptions.
Anyway, I just finished another playthrough of Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning, and we're going to talk about all major features of the game and how it holds up today in general. In order to do that, we need to start from the beginning.
From the beginning, we were wrong. And only now, well into the second decade of the conflict, have we begun to understand the mistakes we have made.
Kingdoms of Amalur starts off with a very cool premise for the story. The world of Amalur has clear and defined rules. Destiny is not up for debate, it's something that's factual and very real. Every living being in this world is subject to fate and destiny. Everyone except the player character, that is. The game didn't even begin and your character ends up dead somehow. He returns to life with the help of the machine called the Well of Souls, and he has a lot of questions, naturally. Questions about his past and his death, which will remain unanswered until the end of the main quest, which I won't spoil here. Before he even gets to ask any questions, he has to do a lot of fighting. The game is quick to introduce the player to combat mechanics, and I think this tutorial does a great job with explaining everything along the way. It doesn't feel like it's dragging on, even though it's definitely a longer tutorial. But compared to how massive the game is, it's just a drop in the ocean. More importantly, you get to learn about all major gameplay features and different playstyles. After all, Kingdoms of Amalur is very heavy on the action, so getting the feel of these mechanics as fast as possible is just a plus in my book. You start off with a simple one-handed sword, and this is where you learn about basic controls. The control scheme in Amalur is snappy and responsive, which makes moment-to-moment gameplay really fun. I played the game on my Xbox Series X, but even when I played it on my PC, I always use a controller. However, you won't have any problems with mouse and keyboard, and you'll get some extra benefits, like more keybinds for example. Moving around in this game feels good, even for today's standards, but it's definitely not perfect. One of the first things you notice when it comes to controls is the lack of a jump button. This was pretty awkward even in 2012, but it doesn't make the game unplayable, only slightly annoying sometimes. There will be situations where you really want to jump down from some areas because it will make perfect sense and improve your exploration experience. Instead of a traditional jump button, Amalur has these little jump points on all maps, which feel very artificial and somewhat immersion breaking. This didn't bother me that much, and you will forget about the lack of a traditional jumping ability after a while. What's by far the biggest issue with the controls is the camera. It simply has a mind of its own that can be extremely annoying sometimes. There are some tweaks you can do and improve it a little bit, but you can't completely fix it. It seems like they felt the need to zoom out the perspective a lot when there are a lot of enemies on the screen, which sounds reasonable, but not reasonable enough to turn a third-person game into an isometric RPG. I'm not even kidding. By trying to help you see what's going on, they achieved a completely different effect because I can't see shit in these situations. I would like to say that you get used to it, but you don't. It's always annoying when the camera just stays behind while your character is like 100 meters away. The combat in Kingdoms of Amalur starts off with a simple combo system. Every single weapon type uses completely different animations, but they all use the combo system. This tutorial will introduce you to all major playstyles where you get to use melee, ranged and magic weapons. It can be really tough to decide which weapon you want to use in this game because all of them feel great to use. The animations are very creative and fun, even for today's standards, and the combat certainly doesn't lack the sense of impact. Hitting enemies with all weapons feel impactful from the very beginning of the game. Sound effects are beefy as well, and I like how all weapon types have unique sounds. Speaking of unique, there are a couple of weapon types in Amalur that you don't see in other RPGs that much, if at all. Fey Blades and Chakrams are such fun and unique weapon types, and I can't think of another RPG which even tried to have something similar. Even if they did, they certainly weren't this freaking cool. Fey Blades remind me of Glaives from World of Warcraft, at least when it comes to the visual design. Come to think of it, some of the Fey characters are very similar to Dark Elves from WoW, so take that as you will. The gameplay mechanics is what makes these weapons so cool to use. Even the basic weapon types like swords, greatswords, hammers, daggers and bows are very fun to use. You can use two weapons at once and switch them with the press of a button, even in the middle of a combo. You can switch up combos in the middle of your attack, and the game seamlessly adapts to your button inputs. For example, every melee weapon have a delayed attack combo that you can unlock, meaning that you have to wait a bit after the first hit for it to activate. But you can just start button mashing the basic combo and activate this delayed combo after a couple of hits, as long as you make the little pause in between. Or how about a combo which makes you launch smaller enemies in the air and use your bow to juggle them? Yes, that's an actual mechanic in the game and it's freaking awesome. You can tell that these developers really wanted to make a fun and engaging action combat system in their RPG. It was not just a marketing gimmick. Everything I described so far can be really fun in Amalur, even after all these years and multiple playthroughs. Sadly, the gameplay has some major flaws, which makes the combat system much worse than it should be. Some of its problems lie within the fundamental mechanics like the combo system, while others are more of a technical nature, like the annoying stun lock mechanic and extremely dumb enemy AI. At the first glance, there is nothing wrong with the combo system, but after a couple of hours you're going to notice the extremely repetitive nature of the combat system. Listen, this game has more than enough new attacks and combos that you can learn, as well as new spells. But the most effective way to take down most enemies is to button mash your basic combo, and occasionally using the dodge and block ability. It doesn't matter which difficulty you choose, it won't make a huge difference. In fact, the hardest difficulty only makes the button mashing worse. I played on hard because I found the newest difficulty very hard to be very annoying, and you can probably guess why. The health and damage output on enemies is just way too high. Combined with the button mash combos you have to do all the time, it makes me hate the game that I actually love. I usually prefer to play these games on the highest difficulty, but things like this can make me hate them, so I try to avoid it. This is one of the examples why I would always prefer one fixed difficulty in these games, but I know some people won't agree with that. That being said, the game starts getting pretty easy on hard, especially in the late game, so I think the difficulty options needed a bit more balancing and polishing. The Re-Reckoning reworked the difficulty and some other parts of the game related to this, but I don't think it was enough. It's something that I highly appreciate though, and it makes me believe that it was very hard to balance this game out for multiple reasons. A lot of people complained back in the day about the lack of challenge in this game, even on hard. But Re-Reckoning certainly felt harder than the base game, even on the hard difficulty, let alone very hard. Hard for the wrong reasons, but still hard. I even made a tips video for combat on very hard in 2020 because I played it a lot when Re-Reckoning came out. I guess my tolerance for spongy enemy health bars was a lot higher back then. To go back to combo discussion, Amalur will encourage you to button mash a lot, even though it offers a very decent amount of depth within its combat and progression systems. Once you figure out that the most effective way of killing enemies is the basic combo, it's very hard to even care about other attacks. I was playing a ranged assassin type build by investing points into finesse and might. That's because I beat the game as a warrior/mage on my last playthrough a couple of years ago when Fate's Sworn DLC came out. I like to experiment with all attacks that are at my disposal, and I even used a lot of different weapon types during this playthrough. I settled with a dagger and a bow in the late game, but I was using everything I could up to that point. The main reason why I wanted to play an assassin is because I wanted to explore the stealth gameplay, which I never did that much in the past. You can sneak around and assassinate most enemies if you're not seen, and if you meet the damage requirements. Although those damage requirements can be really confusing. My character would sometimes kill some huge enemies with no issues and struggle to assassinate one of the weakest enemies in the same zone. You can sort of tell the level and strength of enemies by the color of their names, so it should give you an idea how strong they are. Even so, this failed to make a lot of sense to me sometimes. But this wasn't a huge deal, I could still assassinate a lot of NPCs from stealths. However, the stealth mechanics are bare bones and the game seems to actively work against them. What I mean by this are these sudden attacks which will happen throughout the whole game on each and every map. No matter if you're in stealth or not, you'll get interrupted by enemies with these short little cutscenes and it puts you in combat immediately. This can totally discourage you from even trying a stealth build in the game, because it happens so frequently. So I just started using stealth mechanics occasionally, instead of trying to focus on playing a true assassin build, because it's almost impossible and very annoying. Not to mention the gimmicky detection system.
Cold. It was not the cold of winter. Beside the houses of sorrows, pride and vengeance, a new turmoil fomented. A magic hitherto unseen.
Anyway, the damage numbers on weapons in this game is the most important thing, so even if your build is oriented around daggers for example, they still won't do nearly as much damage as higher level hammer. Assuming you can use both of course, because all weapons have skill requirements. I could use a lot of weapon types with my character because I split my attribute points between 2 skill trees. My build was tuned for daggers, one-handed swords and bows. But if I had a hammer for example, and it happened to deal more damage than my other weapons, it would be the best choice in every single fight. Despite not having attribute points for hammer in the skill tree. I used the frost trap a lot with this build, which allowed me to control big groups of enemies, and I also used a couple of more skills from the finesse tree. What I really like about the progression system is the fade cards that you can use. Fade cards give you various passive and on a rare occasion an active ability that will complement your build. These cards also require you to have a certain amount of points into might, finesse, sorcery or the mix of 3. And they are all combinations you would expect, like mixing 2 or even 3 skill trees. It's pretty cool. You get a specific name for your build once you get these fade cards, which adds another cool element on top of the character build. To go back to the combo discussion, here's what I really like about it, despite its button mashy nature. That would be the ability to cancel animations with another skill and reset your combo. Every combo has a strong finisher, which leaves you vulnerable with a big animation lock. But you can avoid this by simply using one of these abilities and start the combo again. Like I said, it's a very flexible system, despite its shortcomings. The action never has to stop, if you know what you're doing. However, this can completely turn around when someone lands a hit or 2 on you, meaning that you'll easily get stun locked and you can't do anything about it but wait for the enemy turn to end. This is always very frustrating when it happens because you feel powerless. Sometimes it gets so bad that you're going to feel like you're playing a turn-based RPG, ironically. So it goes both ways when you think about it. You can stun lock enemies with your combos and they can do the same shit to you. It's an oversimplification, but not too far away from the truth. This turns a pretty responsive control scheme into a clunky mess, but considering it's situational, it's not fair to say that the control scheme is clunky in general. But it's certainly one of the reasons why the combat system didn't age all that well, even though it's still pretty fun in general. Those stun lock attacks feel unfair, but the enemy can say the same thing to you, so tough luck. Enemy AI can be completely brain dead, especially in groups. It depends on the enemy type, but NPCs will usually just stand there like morons, waiting for their turn like they're in a kung fu movie from the 80s. Once you start exploring some maps with more mage enemy types, you'll have to work a bit harder in these fights because they can be very aggressive. 90% of time you're going to fight large groups of enemies in this game. I guess it's a nice way of making you use your utility spells and abilities for crowd control, but you still want to focus on one enemy and kill them as fast as possible. Big slower enemies can be challenging at lower levels, but later on they turn into a big punching bag. It's more fun to fight these stronger enemies for sure, and they can pack quite a punch. I think there is a decent amount of unique enemy types in the game, but considering the size of the world map, it might not seem like that at first. I also think that some of these enemy types are underutilized and they could easily improve the enemy variety by including some of them on different places on the map. The game still reuses a lot of these big enemies, which makes those big fights really lazy and not so fun. No, but seriously, you'll fight this goddamn troll in like every second boss fight. Other boss fights are not much better, but they actually have unique mechanics. Here's the thing though, you can ignore all of those mechanics if you get to use the primary combat feature that I still didn't even mention in this video, and that would be the Reckoning mode. No matter what I have to say about the technical nature of this gameplay feature, it's freaking epic. It looks cool, it's brutal, and you never get bored of seeing your character being a complete savage. The way it works is by generating a special bar, which fills up with each enemy you kill. Then you enter the Reckoning mode, which slows down all enemies around you and you get a huge damage boost. It's very easy to mow down enemies while in Reckoning mode. Sometimes you'll fail if you try to fight a much higher level enemies, but for the most part you'll kill everyone on the screen. Then you can decide to do a finishing move on one of the enemies you killed. These finishing moves are random when it comes to animations. The game will use various weapons and finishers for this part, which makes the Reckoning mode very cool. Sometimes the finishing move is special and it won't repeat, but this is reserved for some enemies in the main quest. Only when you do the finishing move, all enemies around you will get killed if you did enough damage to them, and it's very satisfying. You'll also get the XP boost if you mash the right button on the finishing move. Even though this mode is very cool, it's also very OP. Up to the point where it makes most boss fights obsolete, because you can kill them easily like this, even the hardest difficulty. I think there was a simple method of keeping this feature under control. They could have just made the bar much slower to fill up, which would even make this feature more exciting to use. You would get it less frequently, but when you do, you can unleash hell on your enemies. It just fills up way too quickly, and combined with its OP nature, it kind of ruins the challenge even on the hardest difficulty. I would completely turn it off when you're fighting bosses, because, like I said, you won't even get to see half of their unique mechanics. I think those two changes would almost completely fix this feature, in my humble opinion. I mean, you can always limit yourself and choose not to use it, but that sounds very stupid. Of course you're going to use it if you can, unless you're doing some specific player challenges in the game. Overall, it's a very cool feature, even though it's extremely OP.
Well, tie me up and drag me under.
Then we have a couple of very big boss fights which are very disappointing, and they also show the true age of this game. This method of dealing with big bosses started to die out even before 2012, so it felt a bit outdated even back then. These mechanics are very gimmicky, but you only fight a handful of big monsters like this. As for some other combat mechanics, the shield in Amalur is pretty much essential. You won't get unique playstyles with the sword and shield, for example. Instead you use the shield as an ability, pretty much. You can still find shields as normal items in the game and equip them on your character. Your character pulls up a shield when you press a button, and he immediately puts it away when you stop holding it. You can quickly use it for the parry mechanic or just actively block attacks. It's very clear to me they try to streamline or completely remove everything that could make the gameplay of Amalur slower, so it makes sense when you think about it from that perspective. And it works okay. Speaking of not slowing down the gameplay, the same can be said about the range attacks with the bow. I was using the bow a lot on this playthrough, but compared to melee and magic attacks, it's a bit underwhelming. It's the only playstyle in Amalur that feels undercooked, unless you use it only for a secondary weapon for some extra damage. There is no free aim mode for the bow, and again, it's not hard to see why, because that will completely slow down the gameplay and change how it works. Overall, this two-weapon system in Amalur is great, because it's very flexible in general, and it allows you to create interesting combinations. The 3 skill trees are done well, and they have a nice mix of active and passive abilities for all playstyles. There is not a ton of active skills in the game, but considering how weapons themselves shape your build and playstyles, I think it's completely fine. To go back to the story, there's a lot more to it than just figuring out what happened to your character before he died. Actually, that's only a very small part of the main story and almost not important at all. The quote-unquote big revelation at the end is neither that big nor important, and it's barely even a plot twist. Your character is a blank slate for the most part, but you can choose different dialogue options and shape his personality up to a point. Every now and then you'll get to the persuasion option, which affects some characters and quests, but that's about it. You can invest your leveling up points into persuasion and increase the chance for this dialogue option to work, which grants you some extra XP and different reactions from NPCs. For example, some fights can be completely avoided with this dialogue option, and I tested this out by reloading a previous save in some situations. For every other dialogue interaction, it's just a bunch of different options about the current topic, main and side quests, as well as the lore. I think the dialogue is well written, but I don't think the story is that good in this game. It has a good beginning and a decent ending, but almost everything in between is kind of boring. There are a few memorable characters like Elin Shear and Eggert.
But something tells me I know you better than you knew yourself.
These characters are well written, well voice acted, and certainly memorable.
It's your fault that I can't pay my tab, you know? I wasn't ever supposed to come back here in the first place.
These characters is what makes the main story a little bit better than it actually is. However, even those characters end up being disappointing, mostly because of the lack of character development. I didn't expect much from Eggert, because he seems like your typical lore friend that you can find in most RPGs, as a follower or as a plain NPC. He's a good dude and that's about it, and sometimes you really don't need more than that. As for Elin Shear, I expected at least something interesting at the end, and I got terribly disappointed. The game will constantly try to build up something with this character. Elin is shrouded in the veil of mystery, and you would think there is going to be a big reveal at the end. But like I said before, it's barely even a plot twist. It's a shame because her character could have been the best with a little bit more context and direction. Nevertheless, I always thought these interactions with her are interesting, and the same can be said about Eggert to a bit lesser extent.
Aren't I always? But have patience.
Amalur is a pretty long game, so you're going to meet a ton of characters and you'll find a couple of interesting NPCs besides those two I mentioned. But for a game that had a 10,000 year timeline written during its development and a pretty deep lore, this part of the game is not that good. For me personally, it's more than enough to keep me replaying the game every once in a while and digging deep into the lore with all the dialogue options, lore stones, and external written articles about the world of Amalur. I found all of that much more interesting than the main story itself. Interestingly enough, one of the lead designers of the game, Ian Fraser, commented that the lack of a true lead character caused problems with the marketing, which instead focused on the world design and gameplay. They ended cutting a number of story cinematics, leaving the main quest presentation lacking and relying on NPC-based story delivery, similar to side quests. While there is some truth to that, I don't think I would completely agree, at least when it comes to the lack of a strong lead character. You don't need to have a strong, predetermined character lead in an RPG for the main story to be good. And at the end of the day, the whole point is to build your character in games like this. Amalur doesn't do a great job with that, like I already mentioned, but I highly doubt having a predetermined character would do anything for the story. I mean, sure, a couple of more cool cinematics here and there would improve the presentation, but then again, that wouldn't fix the story itself. Come to think of it, you could pretty much describe the whole story of Skyrim like this, and by that definition, all stories in Skyrim suck. But of course, that's not the case, and there are many storylines in Skyrim that are interesting. Good presentation can certainly enhance the story, but you need a lot more than that to make the story itself interesting. To go back to the main story, by coming back to life, the player character broke one of the most important laws of nature in Amalur. He is no longer bounded by destiny, and he can create his own paths.
I have a feeling this is going to be a problem.
One of the first NPCs you meet is a Fate Weaver, who has the ability to read your destiny. He was shocked to learn that you don't abide by those rules, and the world that he once knew starts falling apart. This kind of reaction is not exclusive to Eggert. Many NPCs you interact with will have somewhat similar reaction. Humans are a young race in this world, while Fae are the magical and immortal creatures. Meaning that once they die, their souls go back to the cycle and they're reborn. Humans and Fae have different factions, along with unique quests for the main character. A lot of these Faes are not huge fans of humans in general, and they have a derogatory term for them. They call them Children of Dust because they don't respawn when they die, and they like to patronize them in general.
This does not concern you, mortal. You would not, could not, understand.
Even so, you will interact with them a lot throughout the game and do quests for their factions. Speaking of which, the main bad guys are called Tuatha, and their intent is to destroy all mortals, pretty much. Tuatha is a Fae faction who have unleashed chaos upon Amalur. Godflow is the main antagonist of the game and the leader of Tuatha, and he plans to resurrect a newfound god. Godful is a very forgettable antagonist and almost not worth talking about. You'll see him every now and then during the main quest when you try to mess up his plans. He's a cookie-cutter bad guy with zero personality. You'll have to deal with Tuatha for the entire game pretty much, and I like this faction in a way. They are easily recognizable by the armor and weapons they use. Other factions will let you do their unique quests like I said before, and I think some of them are way better than the main story itself. Although I wanted to finish the main story first and start doing faction quests later, but I ended up doing the entire Warsworn questline first, which led me to discover around 80% of the map in the base game. I highly recommend doing all the faction quests instead of hyper-focusing on the main story, because you probably have a much better experience. Although you don't have to worry about finishing the game and the main story, because you can continue playing after you do it. The main story has some cool moments, decent presentation and cutscenes. There are some memorable moments for sure, but some of them have nothing to do with the story itself, unfortunately. The reason why they are memorable is the presentation. A lot of these places that you're going to explore have a very cool visual design. Re-Reckoning version of the game has increased the fidelity of the visuals, which makes the graphics even more enjoyable compared to the previous version of the game. I'm not entirely sure, but I think this has to do mainly with the resolution of assets, but there might be more to it. I think Re-Reckoning is a beautiful game, and you can release Amalur today, and I highly doubt a lot of people would have problems with the visuals. This highly stylized artistic style is very unique, although it reminds me of Fable games a little bit. The biggest strength of the game's visuals is the visual variety. Pretty much all of these different zones in the game have a distinctive look and atmosphere. The game creates a great high fantasy vibe, which makes playing Amalur very immersive even today. You should have no issues to get immersed in this open world and absorb everything around you, if that's your thing. Xbox Series X version looks great and it also runs great. The only problem you might have with the visuals on the consoles is the view range for NPCs, which is pretty short. I can't remember if the PC version had similar issues, but I wouldn't be surprised if the view range of NPCs is much higher compared to console versions.
I have a feeling this is going to be a problem.
Kingdoms of Amalur is a very colorful game in general. It has a day and night cycle and some pretty dark dungeons. Speaking of which, the visual design of these dungeons is amazing. There are many unique dungeons that you will explore throughout your playthrough. I think the art team for the game did such an amazing job in general. The only part of visuals which shows the true age of the game are character faces, but even that is like whatever. Something similar can be said about the character models in general to a lesser extent. But that doesn't get in the way of creating a very magical vibe which few RPGs manage to provide. The only thing to complain about when it comes to graphics or visual effects, I guess, is the lack of any weather effects. This game doesn't have dynamic or even basic weather effects like raining. That's kinda weird when you think about it. Even so, I never get bored of visiting new areas because of the great visual variety. Almost all of these areas are very open and big, with some exceptions. For example, the last big area in the main quest is very linear compared to pretty much all other zones. However, this place still has an amazing presentation and unique visuals, even though it's pretty linear. It kind of makes sense, considering the game started with a linear tutorial zone and it tries to end with something similar. Everything in between that is very open. You have the freedom to explore all maps, although some areas will have much stronger enemies, so it's best to come here later. This game used to lock the level of enemies as soon as you enter the zone, and I don't know if this is still the case with the Re-Reckoning version. I guess not, because I found some very strong enemies in zones that I previously explored, along with lower level enemies. Overall, the exploration is great in this game and it can be very rewarding. The rewarding part depends on the RNG, but you won't have to play for a lot of hours before getting some shiny items that suits your build. I still think the visual progression in this game is amazing. You'll get to loot a ton of unique looking items and it's very fun to try and complete armor sets. This used to be a nightmare in the base game because of the aggressive RNG. But Re-Reckoning changed something related to this and you'll definitely get more of these set items now. Pretty much all containers and NPCs inventories can drop set items and rare items in general. I did manage to complete a set that fits my character build quite nicely, but only in the late game. If you want to 100% this game, or just complete each and every side quest and explore all dungeons, I'm pretty sure you're going to complete a lot more sets. To add to this discussion about the visuals, there are some very cool visual details, like when all the flowers start blossoming when your character gets close to them because of the magic you possess.
Incredible! What are you?
The soundtrack is very good in general, although there are a lot of forgettable tracks in between, but that doesn't matter a lot. I love the combat soundtracks as well, especially in boss fights because they get a bit more serious. I already touched upon the sound effects, but it's worth mentioning again. The only thing which bothers me a little bit is the sound effects for Feyblades. Not because they are bad, but because they are very aggressive, and combined with the button mashing nature of the combat, it gets a bit annoying if you use this weapon type all the time. But that's just me being extremely nitpicky. The voice acting in the game is great in general.
Don't you remember me? I'm hurt. No time for introductions now. The Tuatha are still on the move.
I mean, sure, you can always find some goofy NPC dialogue because these games have so many characters, but that doesn't matter a lot. Kingdoms of Amalur has 3 major DLCs, which add a lot more content to this already very long game. Big Huge Games released the first 2 DLCs called Legend of Dead Kel and Teeth of Naros. After Re-Reckoning dropped, we got another DLC called Fatesworn, which is more like a full-blown expansion, along with some other updates for Re-Reckoning like the Arena mode. Legend of Dead Kel requires you to be at least level 10, and it traps you on the island called Gallows End, which is controlled by the pirate Dead Kel. Captain Bratigan is a very silly character who's your friend, and her tone is much different compared to any other character in the game. This kind of humor might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think her character is a breath of fresh air.
Amazing! We survived! I didn't want to say anything in the cavern, but I was betting against us.
As for this DLC in general, I did like it quite a bit. You get a house very early on, which is pretty cool, and the storyline is okay. However, I think Teeth of Naros is a little bit better when it comes to the story. This DLC introduces a brand new race of giants called the Colossal. Interacting with them is pretty cool and different from everyone else you encounter in the game. You'll need to help these giants by defeating another evil guy who wants to destroy their city. The city itself is very cool because it's floating. Fatesworn came out after all of those years and it brought some of the new gameplay mechanics along with more content. You can check out my review for this expansion if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts about it. I did like it quite a bit, but I don't think it's better than the first 2 DLCs. And that will be it for this retrospective video.
Well, tie me up and drag me under.
I love this game and I will always come back to it for another playthrough every now and then. I really hope that one of those THQ Nordic unannounced projects is a sequel for Amalur. We'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Never make assumptions.
Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.